Good morning.
You better yell louder.
Good morning. Good morning. It's great to hear the global dialogue has already begun. I'm Leslie Greene Bowman. I'm president of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation. Let's start by making sure everyone can hear me. Nods in that corner would be appreciated. No nod. Yes. Okay. Great. And welcome to Montalto. Jefferson's first land purchase. A tiny bit about that in a moment. I'm, as I said, president of the foundation, and the Thomas Jefferson Foundation has owned and operated Monticello since 1923. This is our 90th year as a private, nonprofit foundation with no ongoing government support, and it's our 25th year as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, something we share with UVA and the Academical Village. So it's a thrill to welcome all of you here. I want to thank a few people who have made this possible today. None more than he who I will introduce in a few moments, but let's call out a shout for Ambassador Ronald Neumann. Keep those hands ready, because really the father of all the international work we do is Rui Ramazani, who really was at the beginning stage. Hang on, then you can really get him. He really has been really the great sort of founding father of the International Center for Jefferson Studies, and we're thrilled that he and Nestor could be with us this morning. And also of great help with all of the details of this conference and certainly organizing it, Ambassador Bob Beecroft. And I'm going to shout out to my colleague Andrew Jackson O'Shaughnessy. You'll hear more about him in a moment. And I'll thank a few other staff members at the conclusion of my remarks. But this is our fourth annual co-hosted conference with the American Academy of Diplomacy. And it has grown, and we're thrilled to see that. Jefferson, of course, was our first Secretary of State. It's very fitting that we should coordinate with this illustrious group and their efforts joining ours with our vision to engage a global audience in a dialogue with Jefferson's ideas. Jefferson consistently favored negotiation, dialogue, and diplomacy over military solutions. In 1794, he wrote for Monticello, "As to myself, I love peace, and I am anxious that we should give the world still another useful lesson by showing to them other modes of punishing injuries than by war, which is much a punishment to the punisher as to the sufferer." End of quote. Well, we all know he was challenged by foreign affairs during his subsequent presidency. He tried an economic embargo in lieu of war with the British, but he saw no choice but to resort to arms with the Barbary pirates. But his preference for diplomacy remained intact throughout his presidential service. He wrote in 1811, "But for us to attempt by war to reform all Europe and bring them back to principles of morality and respect for the equal rights of nations would show us to be only maniacs of another character." End of quote. Well, we are here as well because our vision at the foundation, as I say, is very much one of global dialogue with Jefferson's ideas, and our themes today reverberate with his world-changing ideas. My colleague, Andrew Jackson O'Shaughnessy, the Saunders director of the Robert H. Smith International Center for Jefferson Studies, will tell you a bit more about our international activities, but I will just close by welcoming you to Montalto, Jefferson's first land purchase in 1771, and it was a purchase very clearly made to secure his view shed. He looked up as he was building Monticello. He cleared that plateau. He had inherited the plantation from his father. He did not own this piece. He looked up. He's building the first pavilion. It occurs to him that someone could be looking down on him. No. So he writes to Edward Carter, his neighbor, "I'd like to buy as much of your land as can be seen from mine," and a 100-yard boundary beyond. So it's very clearly view shed. Anyhow, this house proposed was not built until 1908, and we restored it in 2011 to be a center for dialogue on Jefferson's ideas. I'll leave you with one last simple quote by Jefferson. I've been doing these chronologically, if you've noticed, 1794, 1811. Now we're in 1820. He's 77 years old, and his ideas about diplomacy have not changed. A government of reason is better than one of force. End of quote. So now I take great pleasure in introducing Ambassador Ronald Neumann, President of the American Academy of Diplomacy. He was formerly Deputy Assistant Secretary. He's been Ambassador to Algeria, Bahrain, and the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. He's been a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, served in Baghdad in 2004 with the Coalition Provisional Authority. Prior to working in Iraq, he was Chief of Mission in Bahrain, and before that, Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Near East Affairs. He's been Deputy Chief of Mission in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, in Yemen, in Iran, and in Dakar, Senegal. On top of all that, he is well known to many of you as the author of The Other War, Winning and Losing in Afghanistan. And he served as an Army infantry officer in Vietnam, holds a Bronze Star, an Army Commendation Medal, and a Combat Infantry Badge. And in Baghdad, he was awarded with the Army Outstanding Civilian Service Medal. I can think of no one more qualified to be President of the American Academy, and what an honor to have you with us today. Ambassador.
Thank you. I think I come back in a moment after Andrew speaks, so I'm going to be brief now. But, am I okay here? Let me do the same thing Leslie did. Is everybody hearing me? Okay, good. For change, there's no mic echo, so I actually don't know. I do want to repeat a few thanks that Leslie made as well. To Leslie, first of all, who has been a strong supporter of this. Since she was talking, let me ask for a hand for her, if I may. We started this. I guess we can now call it series, although we didn't have series in mind when we began. With an initial presentation, which was done down in the library, and which was about a project the Academy did and is still in some ways working on, which is to support proper funding for the State Department and for the development of foreign service. And we subsequently have expanded that with Ambassador Beecroft's leadership into a particular project on professional education and training for diplomats, something in which we are lamentably short. I still remember the story that when Colin Powell, having been a military officer, came to the State Department, he'd spent probably 20% of his career in training and educational assignments, and he asked then Undersecretary Mark Grossman how much time he had spent in similar professional training, and Grossman replied, other than language training, 2 weeks. I subsequently cornered Mark Grossman to ask him if this story was true, and he assured me that it was. That has been a reflection both on the fact that for a long time, in a sense, we didn't do much training, partly because of bad attitude, but in part because we had a kind of guild system of apprenticeship under masterful leaders. That period has ended not so much because there are no masterful leaders as because we now have 2/3 of American Foreign Service officers with less than 10 years in the service. That requires a different application of training. So that's kind of what the Academy does for a living. That is, we are supporting a strong American diplomacy, which for us means both the structures of the service, our diplomats, and helping Americans understand something about what diplomacy is. And so that was the basis for our first venture here. And at some point, Andrew O'Shaughnessy, being a cunning fellow, drove several of us up here to this site where the house was just about to start being reconstructed. And he knew that once we gazed out on this view, he could probably hook us into coming back. But the real, the intellectual founder of this series is, as Leslie mentioned, Dr. Rui Ramazani, my very good friend. And Rui was challenged somewhat spontaneously to come up with an idea, which he did, which we then made into another program. Then we challenged him to come up with another idea, and he did that. And he wrote me that, having had some bad health, he was going to be able to be here, and I was delighted, but I warned him that that raised the hazard that we would challenge him for yet another idea, which I fully intend to do. But it's been delightful to have this. I have to say that on my side, Amy Stoltz, who's sitting here, and somewhere around here is Mary Scott Fleming, have been absolutely magnificent in getting all the details to work. And so if I'm not stealing too much from Leslie, a hand for them too, if you would be so kind. Anyway, so this seems to be developing into a habit, and we may on that basis be back. And I'll be back in a few minutes, but for now, let me ask Andrew. Where's Andrew hiding? Andrew, let me ask you to come up and say a few words before we actually launch.
Well, good morning and welcome. I'm delighted to be associated with this, our fourth conference with the American Academy of Diplomacy. John Kerry became emotional during his induction as Secretary of State, as he talked about the sacrifices and physical risks of ambassadors and diplomats, which he knew firsthand from his parents. The former ambassadors that we have with us today have participated in some of the most dangerous postings and have played a major role in reconstructions of their different host countries. It's a privilege to collaborate with them. Their mission is to broaden public awareness of diplomacy as a tool of national security, and they volunteer to participate in these events. Their presence has already made a big difference here in Charlottesville. Jim and Morgan Perkins, who I'd like to stand. Good. Jim is a former naval commander and has also been an employee of the university. They've attended all of the four conferences, and it inspired them to start their own lecture series known as Ollie through the University of Virginia. Their talks can be downloaded on iTunes, and he and Morgan have really been instrumental in getting us the best turnout for the AAD conference today. I'd also like to thank Rui and Nesta Ramazani. Rui was the one who suggested that we get in touch with Ron and the American Academy of Diplomacy. He's a former chair of the Department of Politics who's advised every American president since Jimmy Carter up to George W. Bush on Iran. He was dubbed the spiritual father of the International Center. I once made the error, very undiplomatically, of calling him the spiritual grandfather of the center, for which he's never really forgiven me. But it was he who encouraged the foundation to adopt a global mission, and he's thenceforth served on the advisory board. And the center has now been going, next year we'll celebrate our 20th anniversary. I'm grateful to Mary Scott Fleming and to Tasha Stanton, Jonathan Potter, and Anne-Marie Farah for the organization here at Montalto, and Amy Stoltz from the American Academy of Diplomacy. Leslie Greene Bowman, the president of Montalto, has just been appointed by the Obama administration to the Preservation Committee of the White House. She's made it a priority of her term as president to have what she's called a global dialogue with Jefferson. The foundation has sponsored 21 conferences abroad in 25 different countries, and these have included most recently Cuba, China, and Russia. Next year we'll be having 25 representatives from different parts of the Middle East, and we'll have a conference in Rabat in Morocco. It's a pleasure to have with us students both from the University of Virginia and the Miller Center, and also local area high schools, the Tandem School and Albemarle High School. They will particularly benefit from hearing top-level diplomats speak candidly, not only about the achievements of the recent past, but also the mistakes. And one of the things I've discovered hosting these conferences is that diplomats actually disagree with each other quite volubly. It's really a rare opportunity to hear such honesty as well as advice for the future. Finally, we're particularly honoured to have Lord Paddy Ashdown as our keynote speaker. He's a former leader of the British Liberal Party, for whose presence we're grateful to Ambassador Robert Beecroft, with whom he worked with Paddy Ashdown on the reconstruction of Bosnia. Paddy also was very much involved in the peace settlement in Northern Ireland, which is really a great model and a great hope for conflicts elsewhere in the world. It's therefore a great pleasure to call upon Ambassador Ronald Neumann to open our first panel. He has been instrumental in our relationship with the American Academy of Diplomacy. He's very keen that we have short presentations and plenty of time for discussion and lots of audience participation. Thank you very much. Thank you.